Welcome to Shadow of Deceit, where hidden truths come to light and every crime tells a story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Ago under the late Assistant Commissioner John O'Driscoll, carried on by his successors including Angela Willis, and now it's culminated in Sean McGovern, one of the most senior figures in the Kinahan organised crime group, in a military plane. That plane flew out from Casement Aerodrome, the Marine Patrol aircraft, last Monday morning. It made a number of stops en route to Dubai. It stopped in Marseille, it stopped in Larnaca, before finally arriving into Al Maktoum Airport at around 8 o'clock last night. It then laid over for more than 24 hours while details were finalised, while documents were completed, before Sean McGovern was led onto that military plane, escorted by Gardaí and military personnel. The plane took off at 9 minutes past 8 Irish time tonight. It's expected back at Casement Aerodrome sometime late tomorrow afternoon or early evening.
And what is the significance of Sean McGovern being extradited from the UAE?
Well, it's highly significant because of who he is and because of the process itself. It's the first time anyone has ever been extradited from the United Arab Emirates to Ireland to face serious criminal charges. Sean McGovern is known as Daniel Kinahan's right-hand man, a very senior figure in the Kinahan organised crime group, and he's one of a number of senior Kinahan gang members who fled to the United Arab Emirates after it became too difficult for them in Europe. They had been based in Spain on the Costa del Sol, but they became concerned with the Garda investigations and the fact that they became targets not just for the Gardaí, but for the FBI, the National Crime Agency, Interpol, Europol, and agencies all over the world. They were frightened that they could be extradited back to Ireland. They fled to Dubai. Dubai was long seen for years as a safe haven for criminals and drug traffickers. Not anymore in this case, since the extradition treaties have been signed, and they will be very concerned now tonight that Sean McGovern, one of their senior members, is on his way back to Ireland to appear.
The lights of Dubai shimmer against the black surface of the night, reflecting a city that sells perfection to the world. Glass towers rise like promises. Wealth flows quietly behind tinted windows. And somewhere within that silence, power moves unseen, untouched, and for years seemingly untouchable. But far away from the polished skyline, blood once stained the ground in broad daylight. A boxing weigh-in event in Dublin, a place meant for sport, spectacle, and celebration, became the scene of something far darker. Armed men stormed in with precision, their presence cutting through the crowd like a warning. Within seconds, chaos replaced excitement. A man lay dead, others were injured, and a message had been sent, not just to rivals, but to anyone watching. That moment would become one of the most infamous flashpoints in a feud tied to a name whispered across continents: Kinahan Cartel. At the center of that shadow network stood a figure who rarely appeared in public, yet whose influence was said to stretch from Europe to the Middle East: Daniel Kinahan. For years, he existed in a strange space between visibility and denial. To some, he was a businessman, a boxing advisor, a man operating within legitimate circles. To others, he was something far more dangerous, a key figure in a global criminal enterprise linked to drug trafficking, violence, and a ruthless grip on power. And yet, despite mounting accusations and international pressure, one question refused to fade. How does someone like that remain free? Authorities in countries like Ireland and United Kingdom intensified their focus, building cases, tracking movements, and issuing warnings. Even the United States Department of the Treasury would later step in, placing sanctions and publicly naming him as a significant figure in organized crime. Still, the skyline of Dubai remained unchanged. No arrests. No dramatic extraditions. Just silence. And within that silence lies the tension that defines this story. The collision between global justice and international borders, between reputation and reality, between what can be proven and what is believed. Because when power is protected by distance, influence, and complexity, the truth doesn't just hide, it waits. If you're ready to uncover how deep this story goes, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Buried Motives True Crime, and turn on notifications. Because some stories don't just reveal crimes, they expose systems. Long before the spotlight of international scrutiny turned toward him, the foundations of this story were already being laid in the streets of Dublin, a city where legacy, loyalty, and survival often blurred into something harder to define. This was where the name Kinahan first began to carry weight, not through headlines but through whispers. At the center of that early rise was Kinahan, a man whose reputation would quietly shape the path of those around him. He was not a public figure in the traditional sense, but within certain circles, his influence was understood. Over time, that influence evolved into something structured, an organized network that would later be known globally as the Kinahan Cartel. What began as localized criminal activity gradually expanded, stretching beyond borders, adapting with precision. Operations became more sophisticated. Connections grew deeper, and with that expansion came a shift, not just in scale but in ambition. It was within this environment that Daniel Kinahan emerged. Unlike the traditional image of a crime figure, his presence was more calculated, more controlled. He operated in spaces that blurred legitimacy and suspicion. Over time, his name became increasingly linked with the world of professional boxing, an industry filled with money, influence, and global reach. For some, this positioned him as a businessman navigating high-level deals. For others, it raised difficult questions about access, control, and hidden agendas. The move to Dubai marked a turning point. It wasn't just a relocation, it was a strategic shift. A city known for its luxury, its discretion, and its distance from European law enforcement pressures became a new base. From there, influence appeared to continue, even as scrutiny intensified abroad. Meanwhile, authorities across Ireland, United Kingdom, and beyond began piecing together a much larger picture. Reports, intelligence, and investigations pointed toward a network that was no longer regional, it was global. But with every piece of information uncovered, a new question followed. If the structure was known, if the names were known, why did it still feel out of reach? Because in stories like this, the background isn't just history, it's a blueprint. And every blueprint reveals not just how something was built, but how it survives. If this deeper look is pulling you in, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Buried Motives True Crime, and turn on notifications. Because the further we go, the more the lines begin to blur.
For me, the media manipulates everyone. They create the reality for people for the future, for what they want to think, how they speak, what they eat, what they buy. Josh is a very dear friend of mine, so is Jack a very dear friend of mine. I know Jack's kids been out with his girlfriend. I know Josh's girlfriend spent a lot of time with them. Really good people. They've done nothing wrong. So what's happening now with them is the media and the fat cats will make Josh and Jack at each other, or their girlfriends at each other. It's because it hides what they've done. So do I think it was...
There are moments in every story where the surface begins to crack, small details that seem insignificant at first, but over time form a pattern that is impossible to ignore. In the case of the Kinahan Cartel, those cracks appeared slowly, then all at once. Tensions had been building long before the world started paying attention. Rivalries weren't just personal. They were territorial, financial, and deeply embedded in a network that thrived on control. What looked like isolated incidents were, in reality, signals, warnings, movements in a larger, more dangerous game. The fallout became impossible to dismiss following the violent escalation linked to the feud with the Hutch gang. What had once operated in the shadows began spilling into public view. Attacks became more brazen. The precision suggested planning. The locations suggested confidence. And behind it all, investigators and intelligence agencies began drawing connections that pointed back again and again to the same network. For Daniel Kinahan, the scrutiny intensified. His growing involvement in professional boxing, including associations with high-profile figures like Tyson Fury, brought a new level of visibility. It also brought questions. How could someone facing such serious allegations operate so openly within legitimate industries? In 2022, those questions took on a sharper edge. The United States Department of the Treasury publicly sanctioned Daniel Kinahan, along with other members of the Kinahan network, identifying them as significant figures in international organized crime. Financial restrictions were imposed. A reward was offered for information leading to arrests or convictions. It was no longer quiet suspicion. It was a global statement, yet despite the mounting pressure from Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the United States, one detail remained unchanged. He was still in Dubai, no sudden arrests, no extradition announcements. Just a growing sense of contradiction between what was being alleged and what was actually happening. And that contradiction is where the tension deepens, because red flags don't just warn of danger, they reveal the limits of control. They expose how far influence can stretch and where it might finally begin to break. If you're starting to see how the pieces connect, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Buried Motives True Crime, and turn on notifications. Because what comes next is where everything changes. Violence does not always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it arrives with precision, planned, calculated, and executed in a way that sends a message far beyond the immediate victims. In this story, that message echoed across borders, turning a criminal feud into something far more visible, far more chilling. The rivalry between the Kinahan Cartel and the Hutch gang had already been escalating, but one moment would force the world to pay attention. At a high-profile boxing event weigh-in at the Regency Hotel, what should have been a controlled, public gathering became the setting for a brazen armed attack. The operation was swift, coordinated, carried out in front of cameras and witnesses. A man was killed. Others were injured. Panic spread instantly, but the intention behind the act was unmistakable. This was not random violence. It was targeted, strategic, a declaration within an ongoing feud that had now stepped fully into public view. In the aftermath, investigators began mapping the connections, tracing relationships, and analyzing movements. The event was seen as a turning point, an escalation that transformed what had been a largely under-the-surface conflict into an international concern. It signaled that the individuals involved were not only willing to use violence, but to do so in a way that challenged the very idea of consequence. While authorities in Ireland intensified their efforts, the focus increasingly turned toward those believed to be orchestrating influence from a distance. Among them, once again, was Daniel Kinahan. It is important to note that while law enforcement agencies have linked the Kinahan network to organized criminal activity, individuals such as Daniel Kinahan have denied wrongdoing, and not all allegations have been tested in court. Yet the scale of the investigations, combined with international sanctions and intelligence reports, paints a picture that continues to raise serious concern. And still, the distance remained. From Dubai, far from the immediate reach of European law enforcement, the question lingered: how does accountability function when geography becomes a barrier? Because the crime itself is only one part of the story. What follows, what is hidden, protected, or pursued, is where the real tension lives. If you're following how this story unfolds across borders and power structures, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Buried Motives True Crime, and turn on notifications. Because the deeper we go, the more complex it becomes. In the end, stories like this don't close cleanly. There is no single moment where everything stops, no final scene where the truth stands fully revealed and uncontested. Instead, what remains is a tension, quiet, persistent, and unresolved. Across Ireland, the scars of violence tied to the feud between the Kinahan Cartel and rival groups still linger. Families continue to carry loss that cannot be undone. Communities remember moments when ordinary places became scenes of fear. And behind every headline, there are lives permanently altered by decisions made far from where the consequences landed. Internationally, pressure has not disappeared. Authorities in the United States, United Kingdom, and beyond have taken steps: sanctions, investigations, public statements, each one adding weight to a growing effort to hold powerful networks accountable. The naming of Daniel Kinahan by agencies like the United States Department of the Treasury was not just symbolic. It was a signal that the world was watching. And yet, the skyline of Dubai still stands unchanged. No dramatic resolution. No definitive closure. Just a question that continues to echo louder with time. Can a place built on global influence and international relationships remain a shield? Or does that very visibility make it impossible to ignore pressure forever? Because history has shown that distance can delay consequences, but it rarely erases them. Systems evolve, alliances shift. What once seemed protected can, over time, become exposed. And in the silence between action and inaction, something else grows: public awareness, scrutiny. A demand for answers that does not fade as easily as headlines. This is no longer just a story about one man or one organization. It is about how power operates across borders, how justice navigates complexity, and how the modern world responds when influence and accountability collide. So now, the question is yours to consider. When power stretches across continents and protection appears to come from distance, does justice eventually catch up, or does it simply lose its way? If this story stayed with you, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Buried Motives True Crime, and turn on notifications, because some stories don't end, they wait.